Most build guides online focus on high-end gear, level 85 to 95 characters, etc., just assuming you're either a veteran player or getting rushed through the game. So today we're going to instead make a guide for the new player, focusing on normal difficulty and levels 1 through 40, to make your journey into the game a lot smoother. As you can tell by the thumbnail and title, today's the starter paladin's time to shine with a Holy Fire Zealot. Let's start off by taking care of the simple stuff first, the stats. While the usual logic of enough strength and dexterity for gear and the rest in vitality holds true here, the order you do it in can be confusing for new players. As a seasoned player, I'll often just dump to get my strength and dexterity early and then go 100% vitality, because I know how far I can push situations. As a new player, I recommend a bit more of a scaled back approach with act-based goals. In Act 1, you should probably aim for 35 strength and 35 dexterity and at least 100 life. In Act 2, raise that strength a little bit more, but focus mostly on vitality. Act 3, aim for 60 to 70 strength here, as long as you're not struggling on surviving at least, and the rest into vitality. Act 4, finish off that strength if you didn't get it in Act 3 into the 60 to 70 range, and then continue vitality until Nightmare. This is so you can equip most of the best gear you can potentially find in normal around the same time you're likely to come across it, while having enough stats for the rest of your gear. And since in normal difficulty, we're not worrying about blocking, you don't need to invest heavily into dexterity. This early vitality approach also helps reduce stamina issues much sooner, which is especially useful around Act 3 onward. Next up are the skills. As should be obvious from the name of this build, you're going to be going Holy Fire and Zeal. There are two options with this depending on who you ask, but it essentially comes down to 1 point in Zeal versus 4 points in Zeal, with the former doing it a bit more damage per hit, and the latter doing more swings for the same mana but less damage per hit. The rest of your points, however, are going to go into Holy Fire as the aura you will use, and Resist Fire as the synergy for that aura. You do want to save your points so you can get both Zeal and Holy Fire at level 6 though. It usually doesn't hurt to do so since your early damage will be fine without it. In the end, it works out fairly similar, and for me, the deciding factor is what weapon I end up using. With the slower weapon, I tend to prefer 1 point in Zeal. Faster weapons, I tend to prefer 4 points in Zeal, and you should know which one of these you're going to be using by Act 2, maybe the end of it. Over to the subject of equipment. Outside of maybe a lucky unique or set item, you're going to be using mostly scavenged or shopped equipment. The second usually being better since you can farm some decent rune words between buying bases from Charcy and Farah and killing the Countess in Act 1. Since this is a normal guide, we're going to focus on this reliably obtainable gear rather than lucky drops, since you likely won't spend much time doing magic find consciously here. It is worth noting you'll generally just use whatever charms you find, since something is better than nothing usually, and you honestly won't get enough to fill your inventory until well into Nightmare unless you're really lucky. But that aside, let's move on to the real gear. In the armor slot, hands down your best reliable option is Stealth Armor, a rune word made with Tal and Eth in 2-socket armor, with the two most common options being the 2-socket studded leather from Charcy, if you make it while you're still in Act 1, or a 2-socket breastplate from Farah if you wait until Act 2. These are both light armors, which means they don't impair your stamina or movement speed. The reason for noting both is that I find it a bit easier to get the merchants to give me the studded leather rather than the breastplate, and the stealth can be really handy if you're high enough level in Act 1 since it gives a lot of poison resist for your encounter with Endariel. Although honestly any 2-socket armor works, you generally do want to lean onto the light armors regardless of which one you want to choose. In the helmet slot, you're a bit more free to mess around because there isn't a super reliable option, but it is fairly easy to get a socketed helmet and use various extra runes from the Countess to get nice bonuses in it, such as Tal giving poison resist, Ral giving fire resist. You could even sneak a little magic find in them by using just the random topazes you'll find along the way. As a common theme, you'll see me favoring resist in normal since they're easily the biggest boosts to your survivability, but you can get a little bit flexible with different options. In the gloves and boots slot, you can go a few routes. Resistance stats are actually fairly common mods that can drop on both of these, and if you don't get lucky with that, you can also shop Elzix northwest of the waypoint in Act 2 for pretty common drops of Frost Nova boots and gloves, since these can be pretty nice until you find better in the form of rares or just get good resist or magic find options later on. Definitely consider the Frost Nova because it is the poor man's early Holy Freeze. As far as jewelry goes, generally I just equip whatever I find. Of course, resists are favored, especially lightning. Some nice attack rating mods can be found early on as well. Your chances of finding things that are too crazy are pretty slim in normal, but you will likely find a few rares along the way if you're even a little bit lucky. If you do find yourself getting a lot of magic rings or amulets you don't want to use, you may hold off on selling them to let you re-roll them in Act 2 by combining 3 rings to make an amulet or 3 amulets to make a ring in the Roderick Cube. While not strictly necessary, it is a nice little trick to fill in some gaps, though selling them for gold can be just as useful if you're a little bit short for the rest of your gear or need to pay for repairs. It's just another cheap reroll option that comes along. For the shield, it's usually either a socketed paladin shield with gems or runes for resist, or a 3-socket kite shield with either Ancient's Pledge in it if you're lucky enough to make or find an Ort early on for Ral or Tal. It's worth noting Ort can be made from 3 Ral runes, or just resist gems in it if you're just needing more resists. The reason we go for kite shields is it's a 3-socket shield that is easily shoppable from Farah in Act 2. They are light armor as well, so they don't impact your movement, unlike the large shield. In late normal difficulty, you can start finding Shale runes, which will give you access to the rune word Rhyme, which is superior and uses Shale and Eth in a 2-socket shield. If you need an easy shield for that, Drognin in Act 2 regularly sells basic 2-socketed spiked shields and bone shields. Since we're not going for block, either is fine, but the bone shield wins out overall long term since you'll probably be using this into Nightmare if you make it. Post-edit Alzorath here, it is worth noting that you can make these in Paladin shields as well. I just didn't make that super clear. Last up are weapons. There are a few options here. The most reliable ones are, of course, rune-based, with options like the 3 Tal Flail, or Steel Scimitar, or Steel Flail being good enough, Steel being a 2-socket rune word. Though my favorite is still the Malice Flail, since it uses super low runes with Ith, El, and Eth, and has a 100% bleed chance and is all around exceptionally good, especially with reduced enemy defense on it, which will help you out a great deal. Though it does have the drawback of life drain, which can be off-putting to new players, which is one reason why the good enough options may be chosen by some players, and they are fine for this. Other interesting options are the Chip Gem weapon formula, which we cover in a few guides, gives basically a magic weapon with random mods and 1 to 2 sockets. It's just 3 chip gems and the magic weapon in the cube, as well as some shop scepter options for boosting, say, Holy Fire's level with some good stats on a magic scepter, if you have enough money for that. That said, you can make it through normal with this build with pretty much any weapon, since most of your damage does come from the aura, so all you really need is a good weapon speed and the ability to just hit the enemy. As is common in normal, any Mercenary can work for this build, though I would say my top 3 choices would be the Offensive Act 2 Mercenary for Blessed Aim, the Combat Act 2 Mercenary for Prayer, especially if you're using Malice, or in distant third, the Act 3 Cold Mercenary for Glacial Spike. For the Act 2 Mercenaries, there is no excuse not to use a Malice on them, as their natural healing will beat it out already, so you don't have to worry about them just dying randomly on you from it. And for the Act 3 Mercenary, you don't even need equipment, but the resist and faster cast are about all you'll need to find that's good on them. Everything else is just kind of there. And that is the build for the Paladin that will take you through normal in an easy mode fashion. It can work a little bit into Nightmare, but you'll generally want to swap out the traditional Fanaticism Zealot in your mid-40s, since you'll start having access to stronger weapons with Nightmare runes and farming options, more points to spend into higher level skills, and a higher priority on boosting block rates because Nightmare is actually a little bit tougher.